Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Josh Does Movies in my second episode this year of By the Numbers. What was originally going to be a DCEU look back has gotten pushed back, and all focus for me in this episode is the Super Bowl weekend box office, better known as Black Super Bowl weekend box office. The numbers were not great, and I'm going to go into not just what those numbers were like this weekend, but I'm going to compare it to 6 weekends prior for Super Bowl weekend and just show you what the box office is usually like in one of the worst box offices of every year, and just how bad this year's box office was compared to those previous years. What might have caused those things? What things can we change? What things can't change? Is this the future of movie and theaters, especially on Super Bowl weekend? Or are there things that can happen that can combat and really not make this be just a completely dead, embarrassing weekend? So let's get started. It is officially By the Numbers Episode 2, Super Bowl Box Office Weekend. Now, let's take a look at what the top 10 was this weekend with the actual numbers they all gross, which I'll be not spoiling, was pretty terrible. At number one was Argyle. It dropped pretty heavily and ended up being number one with 6.25 million. A number that might have been amazing in the 90s, but we're 2024, and this is one of the lowest box office wins that we've seen outside of 2021 and 2020's COVID years, where there really wasn't many theaters open. Number two was new release Lisa Frankenstein. It only got in about $3.7 million. Really low number two. Number three was The Beekeeper, a movie that hasn't been doing horribly at the box office. It was able to bring in $3.4 million as number three, but you can see the trend here of what these numbers are going to be like. Number four, a box office success Wonka, doing well in theaters and staying in the top five now for almost two straight months. It got just over 3 million. Migration is another pretty good movie that's held pretty well, just under 3 million again. These numbers may look good because you're fourth and fifth, but they're not going to be great numbers overall if you were ever looking at a fourth or fifth place movie at the box office, even for Super Bowl weekend. Number six was The Chosen, episodes 1 through 3 of this new season. That was able to be $2.78 million. Number seven was Anyone But You, which brought in a very nice $2.65 million. Another movie that was came out during Christmas time. It's holding in the top 10 not because the numbers are great for it anymore, but because the numbers around it are pretty poor. But Anyone But You has had a great box office run. Mean Girls is now at 1.93 million at number 8. American Fiction with 1.28 million is at number 9, and rounding up the top 10 is Poor Things at $1.1 million. Now, when you add this top 10 together, you get a total of $30.14 million out of that much, or an average around $3 million of box office for any of those movies. This is one of the lowest box office weekends that we've seen in decades. The only weekends recently that we can say that were even worse than this, again, we're back in COVID times when only a handful of theaters were open and people weren't really going out and seeing movies or doing anything out in the public across the country. $30.14 million. I want to say this was like one of the worst box office weekends in multiple decades, like going back to the 90s and the 80s. This is a pretty disastrous weekend and a pretty embarrassing weekend for Hollywood. And it only gets more embarrassing when you look at how Super Bowl weekend did in previous years. And Super Bowl weekend, because of the Super Bowl, doesn't really get many people in the theaters, doesn't really get much going on. So a lot of people will avoid the movies. A lot of people don't, there aren't new releases in movies. So it's usually one of the worst weekends of the year. But let's just compare how this was to the last six Super Bowl weekends that weren't 2021 when theaters weren't really open yet. So how does this compare? This year was 30.15 million. Last year, 47.81 million. That in itself is over half of what this year's crop made. Um, a 50+% increase. In 2022, it was over 50 million. We're almost doubling now what the actual box office weekend, Super Bowl weekend was just 2 years ago. Look at 2020 before the pandemic. It did over double the box office weekend at 64.55 million. Now, 2019 was one of the worst years for the box office. Again, 45.91 million was considered one of the most embarrassing weekends for all time. In a year that ended up doing very well at the box office, 2019 pumped out a lot of big hits. But you can even see in 2018, you were able to get 61.72 million, another double what we had this year. In 2017 was 62.66 million. So you're seeing here almost every other Super Bowl weekend in the past, almost 7 years outside of 2021 when theaters weren't really open, has been able to deliver over $15 million higher, actually over $17 million, or $15 million higher than what our box office did in 2024. This is pretty embarrassing overall, and you can see how the trend kind of is going here. And what's scary is this is a trend that really does reflect in regular cinema today. When you had 2019 with so many box office hits, last year the movies that were rounding out the second, third, the third, fourth, and fifth slots would normally be like seventh, eighth, and ninth ranked movies in most years. And when you look at what this, you know, line graph looks like, you can see the clear dipping of the box office on this weekend, from 2017 on. Now, like I said, 2019 had a bad year in itself. It really didn't have any great new releases, but it is concerning to see that, from 2020 to now, there is a pretty consistent line you can point downwards in the trend. And a lot of studios are now getting worried because after last summer and after beginning of 2024, we're not seeing people really go to the movie theaters as often. And what used to be even like a weekend where nobody would go, it got even worse this year to the point where movies that had half good word of mouth, like Lisa Frankenstein, posted embarrassing, abysmal numbers that make that movie probably not going to be profitable in the theatrical release when it probably should have been if it was able to bring in people or more people went to go see it in the theaters at just a basic rate that would have matched, say, 2023, 2022, and 2020. Now, what has changed since the start in 2017 to see this downward trend? Well, first up, I would say COVID hit. And why do I play? I'm not going to try blaming COVID for everything, but what did COVID teach us as a society? Well, streaming services, not, Disney, Max, Amazon Prime Video, Netflix, and Apple TV, Paramount Plus, Peacock. So many more streaming services have become mainstream, and so many of us have learned to watch what's on those streaming services, whether it's old movie libraries that have been released, in the past with Disney Plus, whether it's whatever Netflix puts out every week on, a TV series or movies. Amazon Prime has gotten a big catalog. Peacock has gotten their own catalog. Paramount Plus had things like Halo debut this week and has had recent movies like Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 debut on the service. I think a lot of what we've seen with the box office these last couple years and why it's not recovering like it was pre-pandemic is because COVID taught a lot of us how to watch streaming services and how to be happy just watching stuff at home. Number two, less reliance on movies. When you go out and start talking to people in everyday life, there's still a lot of movie chatter in some dialogues, but people are watching TV series and these more limited 8 episode series way more often than they're watching movies now. Whether it is True Detective, Night Country on Max right now or HBO, you have, like I said, Halo just debuted. You have things like The Traders on Peacock that people are talking about every week. There are more people watching TV series and keeping up with TV series and going back and rewatching TV series that they like, that they enjoy, that they've heard they like. And movies aren't as much as a priority. And I'll be honest, a lot of these TV series are having movie quality writing, movie quality acting, and movie quality camera work. So if you had a choice between watching 8 hours of decent, of really good content in a form of a show compared to only a couple hours where you're going to have to pay more money at the movies, a lot of people are going to stick to watching them higher up content because it feels like you're getting more for your time invested. Next thing that has to be talked about is the strike last year. The strike caused a lot of movies to get pushed back, and it's let this kind of barren area at the beginning of 2024 take place. We won't start seeing movies really start packing up, in my opinion, until Dune comes out at the end of this month and beginning of March. But I can't help but see that big void of no new really big releases between January and most of February. And when there isn't really anything new or interesting hitting theaters, it means everything that you might have been able to see or got a trailer for previously, people didn't see the trailers. People might not think about, hey, I'll go out and see this movie, or hey, this movie is playing instead. Let me give that a chance. There's less new movies being released right now, and that causes kind of like a dry state in the movie complex. It's why things like Wonka and Anyone But You and Migration are holding up so well, because there hasn't been anything new really to come in and replace them, at least not anything new that is very good quality, which brings me up to my next point, is we've had really bad movies take place in January and beginning of February here. We're talking Lisa Frankenstein this weekend, which does have a pretty decent audience score that continues to go up in the 80%, but it got a B cinema score, which is usually not great when it comes to a new release movie. Argyle was another one that has horrible audience and critic scores, a movie that had a huge drop in week to week on its second week. Mean Girls, again, another one that has very bad reviews from the audience side, and things like Night Swim. But what can make this trend stop? Well, there's a few simple things for me. One, stop dumping all the bad movies in January, beginning of February. This is a time of the year where it's cold outside and we're not going to want to do that many outside activities. So going into a warm theater can actually get people's butts in the seats. So things like Night Swim, things like even The Beekeeper, bro, Mean Girls, Argyle, Lisa Frankenstein, um, there's so many movies I've seen recently that are just quite poor and bad and does not have good word of mouth. And when you hear so many of these movies with bad word of mouth, you know what's going to happen? People are going to tell their friends, and their friends are going to be like, "Yeah, I'm not going to go to the movie." So we need to stop using January and February as dumping grounds for bad projects. Put those bad projects other places. Don't push them all out in the theaters, because you've really created a bad month for people to try and avoid the movies. I think next up as well, you have to have better advertising. Lisa Frankenstein had the same basic trailer throughout, and I think if you advertised what that movie was actually going to be like, you might have picked up a few more audience members, or people might have been more interested in this movie. I think things also like Argyle. Argyle's a bad movie, but it really only ever got one type of trailer. I think another thing you could do to try and raise the box office for Super Bowl weekend is make deals with the NFL and host Super Bowl watch parties at the theater. The NFL shouldn't care whether people are going to be at home watching it or if they're going to be watching in a movie theater. The fact that you might be able to host the big game in a nice theater may bring more people out and make more people watch the game. And who knows, if you are able to get the Super Bowl where with theaters across the country having at least one or two screens that can bring in, say, 30, 40, 50 people, you might have a box office that can bring in an extra $6 to $7 million, you know, for the whole weekend. And that's just one day. Maybe you play past Super Bowls as well. Maybe you put the most famous Super Bowls with the teams that are playing that weekend. Maybe you release a sports movie to play that weekend so people can get themselves excited. I think that the theaters need to make a better conscious way to incorporate the Super Bowl into their actual business strategy instead of just allowing this to be a dumping ground. But you tell me, what do you think will make this trend stop? Not just of what the trend is for Super Bowl weekend going down so poorly, but overall, The box office was not very strong last year compared to what it was pre-pandemic, and I don't know if this year's going to bring that much more strength to it as well. Do you think we're going to get any billion-dollar movies this year? How many do you think we're going to get? Tell me in the comments down below what your fixes are for this and what you think would be able to make this trend stop, or is this just a natural trend as people move into the more digital landscape? I want to thank you for watching this video. Again, By the Numbers episode 2 was a kind of a last ditch pivot. I do have a plan by the Numbers episode 3 coming out where I will be breaking down the DCEU and how successful or unsuccessful that product was. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do a comparison to Marvel or not. I kind of want to keep it just focused on the DCEU, kind of like how I did with Blumhouse Episode 1 pictures. Also, dropping on the channel is going to be throughout this month why X nominee should win Best Picture. I'm kind of developing and making pitches on why every one of the 10 Best Picture nominees has an argument for making Best Picture. So far, we have Barbie, Anatomy of a Fall, and American Fiction on the channel. And again, if you like this type of content, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. I can't wait to talk about the DCEU and everything that happened there in the past, you know, decade and how successful or unsuccessful it was. That'll be episode 3 of By the Numbers, but this is episode 2 of By the Numbers coming to an end. And until next time, I will see you later.